A little experiment to kick things off today for this deep dive. I want you to just look down at your hand. Or if you're driving, maybe just take a deep breath and feel your chest expand. Now ask yourself, what are you actually looking at? What are you feeling?
It's a bit of a deceptive question, isn't it?
It really is, because if you're like me, and probably most people listening, you have this mental model of your body as a machine. It's a biological car. You've got a pump for a heart, you've got filters for kidneys, some wiring in the nerves, and a computer up in the skull.
Right.
It's an assembly of parts, gears, pistons, levers.
And that is the prevailing metaphor of the last few centuries.
Yeah.
The body as a machine. But the sources we have for today's deep dive suggest that metaphor is not only limited, it's actually dangerously misleading. It blinds us to what we really are.
Exactly, and that's what we are unpacking today. We're looking at a fascinating stack of research and notes collectively titled The Fluid Organism. And the big headline here, you are not a statue. You aren't even a sophisticated robot. You are, and I quote, a ceaseless motion of chemical substances.
The core concept here is something they call the illusion of permanence. We look in the mirror, we see the same shape we saw yesterday, so we just assume the structure is static. But the source material uses two really beautiful analogies to shatter that illusion. The flame and the river.
I honestly struggled with this at first because I feel pretty solid, but the flame analogy kind of clicked for me.
It's a very powerful image. Take the flame of a candle. To the naked eye, the flame looks like a solid object.
Yeah.
It has a distinct shape, it occupies space, it has a color. But if you actually analyze it, what is it?
It's just a stream of burning gas.
Correct. It's a process, not a thing. The composition is changing every single millisecond, even if the shape looks permanent. If the flow of gas stops, the object disappears.
And the river analogy is really similar, right? You look at a fountain or a river, and the arc of the water remains constant. It looks like a rigid structure. But the water itself, it is never the same water twice.
Precisely. Matter is perpetually flowing through our cells. It yields energy, builds temporary structures, and then leaves. We are connected to the external world just as a river is connected to its source. We are essentially a conduit.
So our mission today is to move from that anatomical view, which is just looking at the dead parts, the machine parts, to the physiological view, the fluid reality. And let me tell you, when you start looking at the chemical architects behind this, it gets a little existential.
It really does. It starts with a definition of man found in these texts that is quite humbling. It says man is, first of all, a nutritive process.
Which sounds a bit like we're just a walking digestion tube.
A little bit.
But the source makes this incredible connection to the dust of the earth. We hear that phrase in religious context all the time, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. But here the source is saying it's literally chemically true.
It is a literal chemical chain. Just think about it. The geological soil determines the geography of a region. That soil composition determines the dietary elements, the specific plants and animals that can survive there. Those elements enter us through the intestinal mucosa.
So wait, you're saying that the specific minerals in the ground where I live or where my food comes from are dictating who I am?
In a very real sense, yes. That food doesn't just fuel us like gas in a car. It literally becomes us. It dictates our physiological constitution. And, according to the source, it even influences our mental activity and character.
This was the part that absolutely surprised me. The notes actually break down personality types based on historical diets.
Yes, it's a fascinating historical observation.
Mm-hmm.
The source contrasts populations based on what the local soil provided. You have these active dispositions, which were historically linked to populations consuming meat and fermented drinks. And then you have submissive dispositions linked to diets of milk, cereals, and vegetables.
That is wild. So the argument is that your personality, whether you're aggressive or passive, isn't just you or your soul. It's the soil you live on, processed through a cow or a stalk of wheat, and then reconstructed into your brain.
We are chemically continuous with our environment. We really like to think we are separate from nature, sort of observing it from the outside, but we are just nature reorganized into a shape that can talk.
Okay, but we aren't just random piles of dust. I mean, I don't look like a cow even if I eat a steak. There is a structure, a plan, and that brings us to heredity, what they call the magic brick.
Right. Now, usually when we talk about heredity, we think about the genetic lottery.
Yeah, mom contributes an egg, dad contributes a sperm, 50-50 split, boom, you have a baby.
And in terms of the nucleus, the actual genetic code, that is true. But the source highlights a critical nuance that often gets completely overlooked. The sperm contributes half the nucleus. That's it. That is the blueprint. But the ovum, the egg, it contributes half the nucleus plus the protoplasm.
Okay, let's pause on protoplasm. I feel like I haven't heard that word since 10th grade biology. We usually just think of the DNA, the code itself. What is the protoplasm actually doing in this equation?
Think of the nucleus as the architectural blueprints for a house. The sperm brings half the blueprints, the egg brings the other half. But the protoplasm, that is the construction crew, the raw lumber, the cement, and the actual ground the house sits on.
So the father is basically just dropping off paperwork, but the mother is providing the paperwork and the factory to build it.
Precisely. The source argues that because of this, the maternal influence on the genesis of the embryo is foundational in a way the paternal influence just isn't. You can have the exact same blueprints, but if the construction crew, the protoplasm is different, or if the quality of the materials is different, you get a completely different house.
That's a huge distinction. It's a reminder that we aren't just code, we are the substance that interprets that code.
And that substance is fluid. It's highly dynamic.
Okay, so we've got the raw materials, the dust and the food, and we've got the blueprint and the factory from heredity. But once this thing is running, who keeps it going? Because if I'm a fluid process, something has to regulate the flow. Enter the internal manufacturers.
The endocrine glands, the thyroid, the suprarenal glands, the pancreas.
And the analogy the source uses here, I have to be honest, I had to read it twice. It says that the body is as strange as a motor that creates its own oil, its own fuel, and the thoughts of the engineer while it's running.
It sounds impossible, doesn't it?
It sounded chaotic. If I had a car that decided on its own to change its oil or drive faster because it felt like it, I'd take it to the mechanic immediately.
It would be chaotic for a machine. But that is the whole point. This is the endocrine paradox. These glands aren't just passive parts. They are chemical transformers. They take raw chemicals from the blood and synthesize entirely new compounds, hormones, that dictate the intensity of our physiological and mental activities.
So they're taking the raw stuff, the food we ate, and turning it into instructions.
Exactly. They synthesize hormones.
Yeah.
But think about what a hormone actually is. It's a chemical signal that dictates the intensity of your life.
Intensity. You mean like how fast my metabolism is running?
That, yes, but also your personality. Zortz talks about the thyroid, for example. If that gland is sluggish, you are sluggish. Not just your digestion, but your mind, your ambition. The source is arguing that your character is, in part, a chemical byproduct of these manufacturers.
It goes pretty deep into the imprint of vitality regarding the sexual glands too, right? And not just for reproduction.
Correct. We tend to compartmentalize the sexual glands, the testes, the ovaries, as just being for making babies. But the source says they secrete substances that intensify all activities. Mental, spiritual, physical.
It calls it a biological stamp.
Yes. These secretions imprint characteristics like audacity, vitality, and endurance onto every single tissue of the organism. The argument is that general human creative power, whether that's in art, war, or engineering, is biologically linked to the drive provided by these glands. They provide the go signal for the whole system.
So we have the fuel, the blueprint, and the chemical drive. But who is actually driving the car? We need to talk about governance, the nervous system.
Or, much more accurately, the two governments.
Two governments. That sounds like a recipe for a civil war.
In a healthy body, it's a coalition.
Yeah.
But they have very different jurisdictions. The source distinguishes between the cerebrospinal system and the sympathetic system.
Okay, let's break those down. Cerebrospinal is the one I know, right? That's me thinking, I want to pick up this coffee cup.
Correct. That is the conscious system. It deals with the outside world. It controls your skeletal muscles. It processes sight and sound. It's the part you identify as you. But the sympathetic system, that is the unconscious government. It regulates the complex interior, the viscera, the organs, the glands.
And thank goodness for that. I don't want to have to manually beat my heart or tell my stomach to digest my lunch. I'd forget, and I'd die.
Exactly. And that separation is absolutely vital. The source calls it the protection of the inner world. Visceral reflexes are generally independent of the will. You cannot simply think your heart into stopping. This prevents our conscious mind, which is often erratic, emotional, or distracted, from interfering with the delicate machinery of life.
But just because it's unconscious doesn't mean it's not smart. The source brought up this concept of reflexes and used the example of the frog. It's a bit gruesome, but stick with us here.
Yes, the beheaded frog. If you pinch the leg of a frog that has been decapitated, it will still pull its leg away.
Which is pure nightmare fuel. But what does it actually prove?
It demonstrates that intelligence isn't just stored up in the skull, it's distributed. There is an innate, distributed intelligence in the reflex arcs of the body. The leg knows to move away from pain, even without a brain to tell it to.
But for that leg to move, for the nerve to tell the muscle, hey, get out of there is a very specific law of communication involved. The source calls it chronaxy.
Ideally, we should just call it the time factor.
Okay, help me out here. I read the definition, but I want to make sure I really get it. It says that for a nerve to trigger a muscle, their time standards must be identical. What does that mean?
Think of it like a radio frequency. Or better yet, a secret handshake. Imagine the nerve is trying to send a command to the muscle, but the nerve speaks at a certain speed or frequency. The muscle is listening for a command at that exact same speed.
So if the nerve is talking fast and the muscle is listening slow, nothing happens.
Exactly. If the time standards don't match, the message is lost. The source mentions that some poisons work exactly this way. They don't break the nerve and they don't break the muscle. The hardware is completely fine.
So the parts are healthy.
Yes, but the poison shifts the time standard of the nerve just enough that it no longer matches the muscle. The result is paralysis. The body fails not because the parts are broken, but because the timing-the-fluid relationship is broken.
That is terrifyingly fragile. It's like a tiny software bug that breaks the entire computer.
It emphasizes that we are a process dependent on synchronization.
Speaking of interacting with the world, we have to talk about the masterpiece of mechanics, the hand. The source puts the human hand on an absolute pedestal, and honestly, after reading this, I do too.
It's completely justified. Structurally, it's 5 small levers, each with 3 articulated segments on a mobile plate. But its evolutionary impact is what really matters. The source argues that the use of the hand actually stimulated the development of the brain.
Wait, really? I always thought it was the other way around. We got smart, so we start using tools.
The source suggests the opposite, or at least a feedback loop. We started using our hands to manipulate matter, and that immense challenge forced our brains to grow. Mastery over matter-making tools, shaping the world required incredible dexterity. Speech and writing followed that manual dexterity.
So without these 5 fingers, we might not have language.
As the quote says, we never would have acquired mastery over matter without the aid of our fingers. We think we are these purely cerebral beings living in the cloud, but we are really just smart primates who got exceptionally good at using our thumbs.
It's very humbling. But this leads us to a bit of a contradiction. We've described this incredibly complex, adaptive, self-repairing system. But is it tough? Or is it weak?
It is the paradox of robustness and fragility. On one hand, the body is harder than steel. It can survive freezing cold, starvation, immense physical fatigue. Just think about what your ancestors survived. The body has an elasticity that allows it to adapt to almost any climate on Earth.
But on the other hand, a drop of poison, a tiny invisible microbe, a shift in that Chronaxy timing we talked about.
And it disintegrates. The slightest shock to the blood circulation and the whole system collapses.
And this is where the source gets into something that feels very relevant to us today. We used our clever hands to build a world that protects us from the stuff we're tough against, the cold, the hunger, the wolves.
We built a fortress. We thoroughly insulated ourselves from nature.
Which sounds like a great thing. I like filtered water. I like central heating. I very much like not being eaten by wolves.
It is a great thing. But this leads us to the central conflict in the source material, the shift in human suffering. There was a graphic described in the notes that was really striking. It shows 2 arrows crossing, one going down, one going up.
Okay, lay it out for us. What's the downward arrow?
The downward arrow represents our victory over external enemies. Infectious diseases, tuberculosis, diphtheria, typhoid. Science has largely vanquished the bacteria that used to kill us in droves. We won that war.
But the upward arrow, that's the defeat.
Degenerative diseases, cancer, heart disease, neurosis. The organism has become highly susceptible to internal breakdown.
So we stopped the things on the outside from killing us, but now we're falling apart from the inside.
That is the argument. The source attributes this to artificial modes of life, rich diets, a lack of physical struggle, toxic environments. We've created a world that is completely safe for the machine, but perhaps very dangerous to the fluid process.
It's like we built a zoo for ourselves, but the zookeeper doesn't actually know what we're supposed to eat or how much we need to run around. We are robust against nature, but fragile against luxury.
Fragile against misalignment with our biological history. And because we treat the body as a machine, we try to fix these internal breakdowns like we're replacing a spark plug. But that brings us right back to the fallacy of separation.
Right, we think, oh, my heart is sick, just fix the heart. But the source says the body is a federation.
Yes. Visceral autonomy. This is a key concept. Organs aren't just dumb slaves to the brain. They have their own small clusters of nervous cells, reflex brains. A grafted kidney works almost immediately. An isolated heart can continue to beat outside the body if you give it nutrients. They are semi-autonomous biological units.
But they aren't separate.
No. That is the anatomical illusion. A surgeon cuts you open and sees a liver, a stomach, a heart. They look like completely distinct shapes. But to a physiologist, someone studying the active process, they are a single functional being.
This concept of chemical extension was really cool to me. An organ isn't just where the physical tissue sits. An organ reaches as far as the substances it secretes.
Exactly. If the thyroid secretes a hormone that travels to the brain and affects your mood, the thyroid essentially extends to the brain. If the kidneys filter blood that goes down to the toes, the kidneys connect to the toes. The structural frontiers are much narrower than the functional ones.
So, in disease, as in health, the body and consciousness are inseparable. You can't just treat the broken part, you have to treat the whole fluid system.
We have to replace the machine view entirely with the organism view. We are a creature of silence, complexity, and adaptive struggle.
It really changes how you walk through the world. You're not a driver sitting in a car, you're a river of chemicals, held together by a fragile timeline, governing yourself through a federation of organs, all while being made of the literal dust of the place you live.
It is a profound shift in perspective. It demands a lot more respect for the immense complexity of what's happening just under our skin.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the fluid organism, we're left with this lingering question from the source material. We've spent the last century defeating the external enemies, the bacteria, the cold, the hunger. We won that war.
But in doing so, we may have engineered an environment that our fluid process can no longer sustain. We basically traded acute danger for chronic degeneration.
And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. If progress means safety from the outside but breakdown on the inside, what does real progress look like for the human biological unit? Instead of making our environment easier and more seamless, what if the next great leap in architecture and urban design is intentionally building biological friction back into our daily lives? Designing habitats that simulate the physical and thermal struggles our bodies actually need to trigger that fluid resilience, rather than letting it stagnate in a perfectly climate-controlled box. Are we brave enough to redesign our world so it actually speaks the language of our biology?
That is a phenomenal question. If we want to reverse that upward arrow of degenerative disease, we definitely need to stop treating ourselves like broken cars and start treating ourselves like the complex ecosystems we actually are.
That is something I'm going to be thinking about a lot next time I'm sitting in air conditioning, eating processed food, and just staring at my phone.
As will I.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening and stay fluid.